Do you think Mr. Allen is the man on that bridge?
The judge signed a probable cause affidavit for the arrest of him. I can't wait to tell the story, but today's not the day.
So quite a cryptic comment there, right? Do you think Mr. Allen is the man on that bridge? He doesn't quite say yes, but it seems like he is saying yes, right? I want to bring up another press conference, this time the actual press conference. I just want to bring up another section of it. So let's go to that.
Today is not a day to celebrate, but the arrest of Richard M. Allen of Delphi on 2 counts of murder is sure a major step in leading to the conclusion of this long-term and complex investigation. First, I'd like to speak directly to Anna Mike.
Okay, there's actually another section in that interview or in the press conference where he talks about there may be other people they're investigating as well. So it's quite quite complicated. It's like Keegan Klein, then Richard Allen, then possibly somebody else. I don't know, it's quite bizarre, isn't it? So anyway, what we're going to restrict ourselves to in this analysis is a criminal profile of Richard Allen, right? We're going to basically, criminal profile is not really even necessary to say. We're just going to piece together his identity. Who is he, right? And where do you start? Well, if you think about Chris Watts, for example, what is the dominant aspect in his life? Was it his childhood? Was it his marriage? Was it his personality? Was it his circumstances at the end? Take yourself. What is the dominant phase in your life? Is it your childhood, your high school, your young adulthood? Now, what is the primary aspect that one could use to profile you? And you can see it's quite a complicated question with quite a complicated answer. It's not really a one answer thing, although sometimes it is, right? The other thing with this question with profiling is you don't really know the answer until you get to the end of the story. In other words, you only know in retrospect that was the key thing, right? Does that make sense? So let's have a look at the poll. I'm going to greet you guys in a moment. That was the key. So at the moment, 38% say childhood, and that is an important one. Only 4% say job. That's quite surprising. Only 7% say family dynamics. Also quite surprising. 51% say all of the above. That's quite a good answer. Childhood, job, and family dynamics all certainly play into this. Okay, so let's see who is here. Stephanie, good to see you. I think we've got someone tuning in from Luxembourg. Marcus, good to see you here as well. Prayer partner Eve, good to see you. Sageti Nona, Liz Graham, at the scene with Haley, good to see you as well. Vid Inquiries, good to see you. Angela Gallagher, Liesl Maguire, good to see all of you. I think we've got do you have a new member? Is it Vid Inquiries or VLD Inquiries? Can't quite see what that is. At the scene with Haley V, thanks a lot. Timmy I think he's lying on my bed. But thanks for that. Terry Dean, So Koi Cat, good to see you. Stephanie says, I can only imagine how complex this could be. I'm not sure if it's that complex, but one thing that is quite interesting is just how little. So if you Google something like, who is Richard Allen? You get articles like this, like that, right? Now, just have a look at the length of this article. And it's over. If you take away these advertisements, there's virtually no content with who is Richard Allen, right? I'm going to quickly see if I can find another article, because there were a couple that I looked at. Who is Richard Allen? I do know that I looked at this one from the Independent. That one wasn't too bad. So we'll look at that one. So this is from WLWT5. Again, who is Richard Allen, right? That's quite a long article, but it's really, actually it's not a very long article, but it's really not really telling you much about Richard Allen. It seems like quite a long article, but it's also very thin on details, right? And then I think there's this one from the Independent over here. Everything we know about the suspect. And who is Richard Allen? He's married to Kathy. He worked at a CVS store. And then there's that picture. And then what happened to Libby and Abby? It's not a lot of information, right? So what I'm going to try and do in this, were you guys not able to see that? Okay, so it's that article, right? And then this article, it's not a very long article as well. There's that one as well. Okay. So what I kind of want to do in this episode, this live, is flesh all of that stuff out. Like you might say, well, there's really very little to go on. What do you have to go on? Well, the answer is actually quite a lot if you've been paying attention. If you thinking critically, right? There is actually quite a lot to go on. To Helen back, good to see you as well. Sharon Tuck, good to see you as well. Okay. So shall we get started? I'm just going to close that. So thus far, we've actually focused more on Richard Allen's faults in his backstory. We have touched on a few things. We've noted Allen is a recovering alcoholic. That's important. Also that he was institutionalized. That's also important, that it was quite a serious level of being an alcoholic, right? Some people drink, but they don't drink that excessively. Some people are alcoholics, but they kind of handle it. To be institutionalized means it was quite serious. We've also compared his daughter Brittany to Liberty German, the older of the two victims, and we've suggested there might be some sexual transference going on there. There is actually another term for that. Aside from Allen's flaws, what is part of his makeup that makes him theoretically a clever criminal? So in other words, from a criminal psychology perspective, how does he possibly have an aptitude for committing a crime like this and potentially getting away with it, right? In other words, is he the sort of criminal that might be an effective criminal, a good criminal, in a sense of a skilled criminal, an intelligent criminal? Is he an intelligent criminal or a stupid criminal? Is he sly and strategic, or is he dumb and simple-minded and not particularly tactical? And that sort of raises some really interesting questions. Is he a Chris Watts, or is he a trying to think of someone who did get caught? Patrick Frazee, maybe. Patrick Frazee was quite a clever criminal. Is he the sort of criminal that with plenty of resources dedicated to pursuing him might still take 5 years or longer to catch, despite Ali having video and audio footage of him? So where do we start? Where do we start our analysis? So let's have a look at the poll again. Let's go to the poll. 33% say childhood, 4% say job, 7% say family dynamics. Well, guess where we're going to start? Job. We're going to start where uh, the least of you guys say best place to start. The poll was a little bit of a trick question. I said it's about piecing together an identity from scratch. And so kind of asking two questions. How do you piece together an identity? That's one question. The other one is, where do you start? Well, a very good place to start is with a job. Often you know very little about the family dynamics because that's kind of hidden. With the Chris Watts case, you also had a situation where the family dynamics were sort of hidden in the sense that even though you could see all the social media, that wasn't necessarily the true family dynamics. Even though you had this fairy tale, the family dynamics were sort of hidden a layer away from that fairy tale. So family dynamics, although it's important, is very, very difficult to figure out. It takes quite a long time because all of us present a public face. What's going on behind that public face, right? So his job provides an insight into his knowledge base. And you don't need to know too much about a person to know, well, if that's your job, well, then you can thin slice your way to saying, well, I think you're quite intelligent, or I think you are quite numerate, or you know a lot about this or that or whatever, right? And so that's what we're going to do. And it often happens when you meet someone for the first time. If you're a young person, you want to date someone or you want to marry someone, you say, well, what do you do for a living? That's one of the first questions you ask. And when they say, well, I studied that and that's my job, it gives you a very quick idea. What is that person's status? What is that person's sort of the attitude to the world in a way? You know, are they studying archaeology, or are they studying artificial intelligence? The one is sort of going one way and the other is going a different way, right? Let's have a look at some of your comments. He had almost all personal info about people. Yeah, that's true. Anthea says, hi, Nick and Mods, have been following for a while. Okay, cool. So Koi Cat says, he must have been somewhat intelligent. Okay, so you're already getting a sort of a basic sense of his intelligence, right? So let's kind of go into that. So how was Bridgeman able to get into and out of the area without being caught? So I want to bring this up. This is actually a screen grab of Stephanie's words. So we're gonna deal with that in a second. But think about the following. How was Bridgeman able to get into and out of the area without being caught? Well, actually, he was caught. He was caught on camera. But overall, he was able to cover his tracks. There was staging, which was clearly sufficient as well. There was staging, and the staging was clearly sufficient. As in the Ramsey case, there was enough to confuse the investigators, right? So I want to talk a little bit about staging to begin with. When you've got staging, you've already got a sign that someone is experienced at the idea of showing a certain exterior. Meanwhile, what is really happening is totally different, right? So someone who is using staging probably also has a dual identity. So that is something that I think law enforcement may be missed. That's something maybe FBI profilers may have missed, is this idea of staging is quite sophisticated, right? If you think about a random guy who's not even in the area, who comes into this area and opportunistically does something, well, then you wouldn't imagine there would be staging. But in a scenario of staging, it shows something quite sophisticated, right? Something is made to look a certain way in order to either make things look worse or to make things look different. And isn't the whole persona of Richard Allen a kind of staging as well, the living in plain sight thing? The whole, I'm a family man, I work at a pharmacy, why would I be bridge guy? That's a kind of staging as well. Do you guys see that? In other words, there's a parallel to the staging of the crime scene and the perpetrator kind of doing a little bit of stagecraft himself by pretending to be this nice guy, right? And that is definitely part of his persona. I mean, it's also part of the persona of Chris Watts. He's a nice guy, couldn't have done this. Same with Scott Peterson. He's a nice guy. He couldn't possibly have done this. That's kind of his disguise, right? So have a look at some of your comments. Stephanie says, my profession is a teacher. I became a pharmacist technician part-time while home with my children. Okay. Brits Creek says, I heard somewhere that Alan was just a backup pharmacy tech. I've also heard that. I'm actually not sure if someone said that they were, but I have heard something like that. Okay. Staging is becoming more and more common in true crime. You have it with almost every case. In fact, you need to start anticipating that there's going to be staging with every case. There's going to be staging of digital messages as well. Messages deleted and some messages put there to falsely represent things in a misleading way. Staging has become very common. Stephanie says, I will say it's much easier to become a pharmacy technician considering the responsibility and information we have at our fingertips. Okay. Marcus says, as clever and organized as he may have been, he was extremely lucky not to have been identified by the video and voice. Yeah, he was extremely lucky, but I mean, look where he is now. Hasn't he been identified? So that does again raise the question, did he know that he was being recorded, thought he had it taken care of, and then forgot about it? Or did he know he was being recorded? Because I'm pretty sure that he did, and then thought he would take care of it, but then he actually couldn't find the phone when he looked for it. After all the criminal activity, when that was done, and he thought, well, I'll just go and find the phone that was dropped over there. I saw where she dropped it. Maybe he struggled to find it. So again, he may have thought he had things under control, but then he didn't. You could also have had a situation where both girls peeled off. Both of them ran in different directions. And Libby dropped her phone or something, and then he had to go and run after the other one. And that is how he lost, He lost track of the phone. That could also be what happened. Okay, so let's deal with what Stephanie's written over here. To succeed as a pharmacy tech, you will need to be very organized, since you'll be responsible for keeping important records about drugs and patients. This means that you will need to develop specific computer skills, which you can learn during your coursework or internship. Now, in a very simple way, I think you could ask the question, is Bridge Guy computer literate? Is Bridge Guy computer dude? Is Bridge Guy someone who spends an average amount of time in front of a computer, or above average amount of time? Now, already a man whose part of his job is being behind a computer, certainly at work, may suggest when he goes home, he's also in front of the computer. In fact, in this situation, you can almost imagine that he might record, maybe he might write down, take notes of certain people, scribble down some notes and then go home. And that's where he has his alter ego, like Thomas A. Anderson and Neo. Well, there may be Richard Allen and then some kind of alter ego online, right? Perhaps we take some of this information and who knows what with it. But basically what it's telling you is someone who knows their way around a computer, that computers are part of their makeup, part of their identity. And someone who's on computers a lot, where could that lead you, right? Could that lead you into social media? Certain areas of social media, could that lead you into certain areas of pornography, right? Then it goes on to say, you will also need to be a people person, because much of your work will include interacting with customers, co-workers, and pharmacists. And I think it's easy to assume that bridge guy is not a people person, that he's an oddball, that he's got poor social skills. And I think that is somewhat true, but also somewhat not true. I think he does have people skills, which is why he's able to get a job and keep a job. I think he's got social skills, which is why he was able to get married and stay married. But there's also there seems to be something wrong with those social skills. There seems to be something missing. And you can see with that sort of flat effect that there's some spark that seems to be missing there. Do you guys agree with that? Stephanie says he has adaptation skills, perhaps. Okay. So, yeah, some people are talking about the dark web. So, let's deal with this. Although from the new Facebook photos, Alan doesn't seem like a people person. He must be if he was able to A, get a job, B, get married and stay married, and C, hide in plain sight. We also know from one of his work colleagues that that's true, that he was actually a really likable person. He didn't come across as a weirdo. He didn't come across as a creep. He didn't come across as a quiet, somewhat strange person. He seemed really likable and I think quite intelligent. So let's deal with that. Can you guys see that? Okay, I suppose you can't see that. So can you see it says over here something about recovering alcoholic? Then he was literally one of the nicest people working there. He was sort of joking around. He didn't seem paranoid. In other words, he seemed completely normal. And so that was obviously a kind of an act, just like it was an act with Chris Watts. The Sermon on the Porch was him being Mr. Nice Guy. Scott Peterson, that was an act, Mr. Nice Guy. Jeffrey Dahmer, same thing. He would be in trouble. The police would sort of be on his case and he'd be able to nice guy his way out of that, right? That shows actually someone with pretty good social skills. Now, the question is, if he had good social skills, then why did he need to prey on young children? And I think the answer is he had a certain amount of basic social skills, kind of charm. But when it came to, let's say, romance, did he have those same skills, or did he feel like he had those skills? Yeah, another way to put it is when he was a young man or even a teenager or even a slightly older man, did he have skills in terms of the opposite sex? That's totally different. Okay. Did he have skills in that area? Okay, so I want to bring up this picture, but I don't really want to show his wife. I guess that's the best I can do. If I can do it like that. So I think in that image, you kind of get an idea that he doesn't look like a creep. I mean, his eyes do, but if you passed him on the street, I don't think you'd give him a second glance. If you saw him in a pharmacy wearing kind of a lab coat, you would think this is quite a professional guy, right? But there is something going on there. It's not like a clean bill of health here. So what is going on? So what his job is telling us is that he's organized, that he's a computer literate person, more perhaps than normal, and then also that, because it's part of his job, although computers are part of most of our jobs these days, but there's got to be a lot of organizing of that kind of information. And then he's also got a certain amount of people skills, which in a way is kind of surprising, because you would almost imagine an SO wouldn't have those skills. That's why they're an SO, right? So now we go into family dynamics. Now, Richard Allen was Did you guys know this? Richard Allen was 8 months younger than his wife, or conversely, Kathy was 8 months older than Richard. Chris Watts is also about a year younger than his wife, right? So let me put that in chat. Did you guys know that? That's a really basic thing that you would imagine the news media could siphon just from basic information, right? Now, this may offend some people. So you might say, but my husband's younger than me, or my wife's older than me, right? And I've had relationships both ways. I've had relationships with older people and with younger people. So this isn't about you or even about me. It's about the basic thing in society is that you generally find a man, you generally find an age gap between heterosexual couples. I don't know what the average is, but it tends to be the man is a little bit older and the woman is a little bit younger. I'm not saying that's right, and I'm not saying that's what I think it should be. I'm simply saying generally in society, I think you see that. I want to see what the statistics say. Statistical age gap. Heterosexual married couples. Let's just see what the stats say. What's the average age difference in a couple? Well, it is 2.3 years with a man older than the woman. That's shall I put that search up on there? You can see I actually spelled it quite wrong. But so let me just bring that up. So what you see there is you have a typical age difference of 2.3 years. Usually the man is older than the woman. And then you've got people asking what age gap is acceptable. Well, 1% have an age difference of 28 years or more. Now, if you think about the Depp versus Heard case, there was a huge age gap there, like 21 years, right? And if you think about just this idea, what is normal? Well, if you think, well, someone like Johnny Depp wants the perfect situation for himself, he wants a much younger wife or something like that. Or you might say Amber Heard wants a perfect situation for herself, a really wealthy, good-looking husband, right? But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is there is a certain kind of what's the kind of psychology in relationships where people kind of say this is the ideal thing, right? And what I'm trying to get at, and I'm trying not to offend anyone saying this, is it may not be ideal if you're a man that you have an older woman as your partner compared to a younger woman, right? Now, you might be offended by that and say, but I'm an older woman who have got a perfectly normal relationship. But we're going to get to sort of normal, what do you call it? Normal, I don't even want to say normal, average relationships in that sense, right? Stephanie says, I don't know if 8 months is a big difference. So you can think about it like this. His wife is older than what he is, right? And what he's doing in the woods is with someone much younger than what he is. So does it bother him? Not does it bother you? Does it bother him that his partner is older than what he is? Put it in another way, would he prefer a younger partner? Now think about Chris Watts as well. Chris Watts was in the same thing where he felt, I would rather be in a relationship with this person. Again, you might say, but that's just not fair. Well, the thing is, some people would prefer to be with someone younger. Some people would prefer to be with someone older. I'm simply trying to make the point that Richard may have felt in terms of the family dynamic, in terms of the dynamic in terms of his marriage, that that is what he was feeling. Now, I try to make the same argument with Scott Peterson and Amber Fry and Lacey Peterson, but Lacey and Amber were almost exactly the same age. So you can't really make that analogy. It doesn't always work, right? But you get where I'm coming from. It's this idea of I'm, in a way, in one way of addressing this whole idea is it's taking the Chris Watts scenario where I'm not happy in my marriage, so I go out of my marriage to get what I really want. Well, what does he really want? Well, in his case, a certain kind of woman, a certain kind of experience, right? In Richard Allen's case, if he is bridge guy, it's possible that he was also not totally fulfilled in his marriage. And so what does he want? It's not quite the same as the Chris Watts case, but it is certainly, you get the idea that in some way he wasn't fulfilled in his marriage, and you certainly can't blame his wife for that, because maybe something really weird is going on with him, right? Certified Quality says, hopefully we can find out why he did this when he's in court trial. Molly Brown says, we'll have to know what kind of parents he had. What was his childhood like? Indeed, but we're not there yet. So we can talk about that. We can say, I'd like to know what his childhood was like, but we don't. I'd like to know what his parents were like, but we don't, unless an uncle comes forward, unless a childhood friend comes forward. But we're not there. So we've got to deal with what we do know. What we do know is his wife was older than him, and he seems to have committed a crime. What does that mean? So let's look into that sort of aspect. Was he happily married? Maybe he was, but was he sexually satisfied? Right? All those questions. So on November 19, so this is where you start addressing that question. On November 19, Kathy and Richard got married. November 19, 1991. Okay. So that's another thing. Media, mainstream media, couldn't you have just found that out? He got married in 1991. So let's see how good your math is. How old do you think he was when he got married? Beverly says, take down the photo, please. Scary. Beverly, I think if you've been triggered by this, if it's really worrying you, maybe you should, not watch. Liesl McGuire, thank you for your unique in-depth coverage. Once again, agreed. And Richard's face when his wife finds him in the car spoke volumes. Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Jackie says, I feel he lived in a fantasy world. That's definitely part of this. Also, it's like daydreaming. It's like, I'm not miserable in my life, but I'm daydreaming of certain things. And then the daydreams start catching on. Remember what we said in the previous analysis? We said, how do you begin to covet? Well, we covet what we see every day. What did he see every day? Okay. He's 50 now, yeah. So he was born in 1972. So he was around about, there you go. He's about 20 years old when he got married. So are you starting to get a natural feeling, right? Are you starting to get a natural feeling like this guy got married younger than a lot of people? Like some of my best friends all got married at 24. This guy got married at 20. How old were you when you got married? So then you say, if he got married at that age, did he play the field much? Did he have many relationships in his entire life? Did he later on wish that he did have some relationships? Because we live in a highly sexualized society. What do you think is the answer to that? So do you think him marrying, just on that question, do you think him marrying early has had an impact on his psychology. Let me put it another way. Do you think one of the most important things that we've hit on so far is the fact that he married early? Do you think that that is important, or do you think it's not important? Look at some of your comments. Paola says, why did he do this? Christopher says, is your dog warm today? Well, I think he's on my bed, so I think he's okay. It's kind of approaching his bedtime. Paula says, I don't think him marrying early has anything to do with him being a murderer. Okay. So Paula, he didn't only commit murder, he did something else, right? The murder was actually a byproduct of the other thing that he was doing, right? Do you get what I'm saying? The murder was actually a byproduct of the other thing, is actually the thing he wanted to do. Pretty in Pink says, not important. I married at 19. I'm not a murderer. So, you know, I married at 19. I'm not a murderer. So it's got nothing to do with it. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So if you think about, I mean, that's a great question from Jennifer. What made him an alcoholic? So if you think about this idea that he married early, and do you think he was totally, because of what he did, because he's got this unnatural appetite for children, this unnatural attraction for young girls, right? Do you think marrying early aggravated that, or do you think it had nothing to do with that? That if he was single for, let's say, another 10 years and he had relationships with teenagers when he was 20, so he's 20 and he has relationships with someone who's 15, 16, right? Do you think that that would sort of address some of that stuff, or do you think it's got nothing to do with it? Nature Lover says, hard to say at this point. I think that's such a great question. What made him an alcoholic? Something was really eating at him. Okay, let's see what some of you. So Trevor says it's got nothing to do with it. Okay. So Trevor, what do you think does have something to do with it? Or are you saying he's just evil? Trevor, what do you think the answer is? If you say him marrying early had nothing to do with it, what did have something to do with it? Yeah. Well, it's 2022 now. Nobody gets married. I don't get married. I haven't gotten married. But we're not talking about us. We're talking about him. And he got married in 1991. So he's been married 31 years. And I think he was married 26 years by the time he committed this crime, assuming that he did. Mary says, I think it's possibly a strong connection. So that's quite interesting from Mary. So some people say, I think it's a strong connection. Others say it's got nothing to do with it. Okay. So if you say it's got nothing to do with it, what does have something to do with it? Nature Lover says, I'm a confirmed bachelorette, so I know more about marriage than married people. Paul says, I think he cannot cope with his thoughts or manage them. Probably lived in a dysfunctional family. S.M. Koblinski says, I think all the factors you mentioned played in. I think you're on the right track. Sagedi Nona says, it all matters. Okay. So I personally think that you've got to look at certain things that are a little bit out of the norm. So it's not like, and the whole thing is you've got to get out of, what does that say about me? We're trying to investigate his psychology, not how it reflects on you. This isn't about your life or your circumstances or your relationships or your attitudes. It's about his. So let's get into his shoes. So you say, what are certain things that are a little bit strange here? Is that a fair question to ask? So one of the things we've said is, well, his wife's a little bit older than him. And as Stephanie says, that's not really a big deal. Yeah, but that's not the only thing. So that's one thing. One thing that's not nothing. So you're kind of saying there could be a little something there. Then you say, he got married quite young. Then you might say, yeah, but being married young means nothing. But now we're taking being married young to someone slightly older than him. Now you put those two together. Now I would kind of take it a little bit further than that and say, if you think about Chris Watts marrying someone who's older than him, in the Chris Watts marriage, he was actually playing second fiddle to a large extent. His wife was kind of the leader. She was an extrovert. She was, certainly in the marriage, she was kind of setting the tone. And he would sort of go along with that. You kind of get the same feeling from the little bits of social media we've seen, is that his wife is also a little bit older than him. And you kind of get the feeling she wears the pants, that he's sort of just kind of along for the ride, that he just goes with the flow. You kind of get that sense. In other words, you get a sense that in the same way that Chris Watts didn't seem to have really established his identity, he just sort of goes, someone else makes all the decisions. You kind of get the sense that Richard was also sort of just being dragged along or kind of going along with whatever was going on, right? In other words, he's not this fully established identity. And how could he be at 20 years of age? But he's not this fully established identity that's kind of taking charge of the marriage and basically doing all of that kind of thing, right? And so in that scenario, can an alter ego start developing? That's why you've got that picture behind me where there's this one face where I'm the nice guy, but maybe the nice guy doesn't always want to do that. Maybe he doesn't always want to watch that movie. He doesn't say anything, but he doesn't really like that idea. And then somewhere another narrative starts to develop. Somewhere another wolf starts to come into existence. And that wolf starts getting nourished. This wolf that wants to feed on other things. A wolf that is not interested in being a nice guy all the time. A wolf that's not interested in being told what to do, but wants to tell someone else what to do. But it's a wolf that's not used to that role. So it's kind of a secret life that starts coming together. Does that make sense? And you get to all of that material just if you go down that route of, well, his wife's older than him, and the choice that he made to get married, was that an ideal choice when he made it? Was he in control of his life, or his circumstances in control? Did he have a lot of agency, or didn't he have a lot of agency? And then where does that take you when it starts building and building and building? Right? So let's have a look at some more of your comments. Studies show this type of behavior starts out at age 15. Laura says maybe it's about control. It so often is about control. It so often is about power. Yeah. So you are potentially dealing with an individual here who is not feeling very powerful in his life. And isn't the answer, yes, he isn't? So when you see photos of him on Facebook, he's not smiling. He's not in, how can I put it? He's not like in the moment. He's almost like a passenger in someone else's story. Chris Watts, I think, felt like that as well. Chris comes stand for a selfie. Shanann in that situation has got all the agency, and he's just along for the ride. But you can imagine when Chris Watts went to the sand dunes, he may have said, Nikki, let's take a photo. There he's part of his own story. There he's the protagonist in his own story. There he's become an individual in his own story. So, so the most authentic moment for Bridge Guy probably was committing this crime. It's the first time, perhaps, that he stepped out of his nice guy persona and he did what he really wanted to do. He exerted control the way he really wanted to do that. You get what I'm saying? In other words, his whole life is actually inauthentic. He's this powerless, pathetic figure. And yet in that moment where he commits the crime, he steps into the person he really wants to be, right? He steps into this role of a dominant force. That's who he really wants to be. And only in this situation, in the woods, with someone much smaller, younger, and weaker than him, then he's able to exert that kind of power and control and get a sense of agency. Of course, it's not real agency, but that's what he really wants. He wants that feeling of being alive, that feeling of getting what he wants for once, right? Kim Usher says, makes sense. He stepped out in the moment to be who he really wants to be. I say this very often, that a lot of all murderers are liars, so that they've been living a lie and they're used to living a lie after that. But not all liars are murderers, right? And so often the most authentic moment for someone who's about to become a murderer is the murder, where they say, I can't continue to have my fairy tale taken away from me. I can't continue to have all of this imposed on me. I need to impose myself on the world as well. And so that is in other words, the least authentic moment in terms of justice, right? The least honest thing for that person is their most authentic moment, because they're addressing the inauthenticity of their own life, this role they've been playing that they don't want to play. Does that make sense? Down the hill was a command. That's such a great comment. Okay. So, as I say, Richard Allen got married quite young, at about 19 years of age. Like Chris Watts, it feels like Richard may have had very little experience at dating, and perhaps as a result, after 26 years of marriage, while he didn't want to get divorced, nevertheless, he wanted to indulge his secret desires in other areas. I find it interesting that let me bring up this image. Have you guys seen that before? Do that. You guys seen that picture before of him? Don't you think he looks a little bit like Chris Watts? Chris Watts is also quite overweight. Doesn't that look like quite an overweight Chris Watts? That could be like Chris Watts's bigger brother, more overweight brother. And that overweight thing is, I also think, something that makes you think about self-esteem. How was his self-esteem? Why was his self-esteem the way it was? And I do think self-esteem is a key to this whole thing. Why do you need to be with a young girl? Well, don't you have a self-esteem problem? Just that. Don't you have a self-esteem problem? Well, where did your self-esteem problem come from? It's the exact same thing with Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey, why can't you just you've met these guys, they like you. Why can't you just have a relationship with them? Why can't you let a guy hug you? And why can't you have a proper relationship like anybody else? Because I've got a self-esteem problem. That's the answer. Where does the self-esteem problem come from? That's the other thing. Probably from parents. where do most people get their self-esteem or not get their self-esteem? Well, from being valued as a child or not being valued as a child, right? You can validate yourself, but if you don't get a critical amount of minimum self-esteem, then you can be in trouble, especially if a parent is an addict or a parent is this or that, right? So that's that aspect. It feels like Richard had very little experience at dating, and perhaps as a result, after 26 years of marriage, while he didn't want to get divorced, he nevertheless wanted to indulge his secret desires in other areas. What I want you to do is look at that picture while I put these words on screen and tell me what you think. Someone says it's not Richard. Okay. That's when it's been misreported. Richard may have had very little experience at dating. So whether that's him or not, do you think that that's true? Okay, so that's his brother-in-law. Okay. So that's kind of in his family, right? Okay, so just calm down. Just calm down. So if the question is nevertheless the same question, it's nevertheless the same question. Do you think Richard had relatively little experience at dating? That's the question. Songbird says yes, very little. As far as I know, Kathy's deleted her Facebook. Is that right? Or she's disabled it. Kathleen says, I don't think he had any experience. So that then raises another question is, do you think a guy with, let me type this out. Do you think a guy with very little experience how can I put this? Can you see where I'm going to go with this question? Do you think a guy with very little experience could develop unhealthy what could one say? Unhealthy ideas, right? Yeah, exactly. Compared to someone who has quite a lot of partners and they see someone they like and then something happens and then after that relationship they see someone else and then something happens and basically they have a feeling and then there's a response and then there's an experience and then on and on and on and on. Which one do you think predisposes itself to this situation? Being married at a young age. Yeah, well, that's also. So I wanna sketch this out in the simplest possible terms, which is a guy. Now, this is obviously a heterosexual thing, but I suppose you could make it anyone is attracted to anyone. Let's just say someone sees someone who's single, sees someone they find attractive. That person then approaches this person they find attractive, and the person then doesn't respond. What do you think the result is? in a nutshell, someone has feelings for someone and they either approach that person or they don't even approach that person. But the end result is those feelings go unresolved. There's unrequited thing there. So what do you think that leads to? Well, in a word, that, right? And so how do you deal with that tension? I want this experience, I can't get it. Okay. I want this experience, I can't get it again. Okay. Tension, tension. I see you. Do you see me? No, I don't actually see you. Tension. How do I deal with that? How does someone deal with that when it kind of keeps happening? Either they don't have the courage to reach out, or they do and nothing happens. What do they do? Do they get married early? Do they take what they can get? What do they do? Is part of that process that another sort of aspect of that person starts indulging in fantasies. Well, I can't get what I want. Well, if I fantasize, I can. I can't get what I want, but if I daydream about it, then I can. If I ask you, you'll say no. So if I dream about it, then I can get it. Do you see what I'm saying? So if there isn't tension, then you're not going to have that splitting off. If there is a sense of relief and satisfaction, then there's no need for all of that. But the thing is that there isn't that. There is tension. That's quite an interesting point. And I think you could say that also of Jeffrey Dahmer. I think you could say the same thing. That's quite an interesting point. Tension within. So what does he do with that tension within? Now, it's the nature just with pornography, as I think it is with drugs. You try and get a bigger kick every time. And eventually, certainly with pornography, it can lead to, well, now I need, the only thing that's going to trump this feeling is the real world, is doing something in the real world. Okay, so I find it also interesting that the Allen family only had one child, a daughter. So are you guys noticing I'm touching on very obvious stuff? He got married. Okay, when did he get married? He got married. How old was he? How old was she? It's very obvious stuff. And now, how come they only had one daughter? Why didn't they have more kids? What does that mean? Does it mean they couldn't afford more kids? Did it mean that Richard was happy just having a daughter? Didn't Richard want a son? A lot of men want sons. Didn't Richard want a son? So I think it's interesting because on the one hand, I suspect they could only afford one child. I think someone said he was working at Walmart, right? Can you afford, how many kids can you afford working at Walmart? Perhaps quite a few, maybe not. Stephanie, I don't know if I'm right on this, but isn't it true that Alan only qualified as a pharmacist tech in 2018? Have I got that right? Is that an accurate statement? Is that an accurate statement? Renee says, taking notes in my TCRS notebook, need shorthand. Have you got your TCRS notebook? I've got mine. Have you got yours? Okay. Cool. Okay. Good to see you, Cotton Star. Definitely on in terms of this subject matter. Liz Graham, I wonder if a connection with his daughter. Well, you even had his daughter, a photo of his daughter at that bridge. Now, if you think about just that, you think about his daughter was photographed at that bridge. I believe it was photographed before the crime happened. Then one wonders whether he looked at that photo and some kind of fantasy developed around that particular thing. One wonders whether there was like a photo shoot of his daughter, and the father looked at those photos, and from there something very specific kind of started. Does that make sense? Because if you think about it, as far as I know, that photo, although it was posted later, it was taken earlier. And did that play into specific fantasies? Bria says, yikes. Songbird says, I want one. I don't know, Songbird, Stephanie, can you maybe put that in somewhere? Stephanie says, the pharmacy tech salary alone couldn't support a large family. Yeah, but I mean, he only became a pharmacy tech, I think, in 2018, but then his wife also had a job. They actually seem to have quite a nice house, if you ask me. It looks like quite a nice house. Bria says it's important to know whether the photo was taken before or after the murders. You can't always rely on what the media says, but I've certainly heard that it was taken before, because people say, why on earth would Brittany pose there afterwards? And I think it's a valid question. I don't know it for a fact. I know it was posted July something 2018. As far as I know, it was taken before. I don't know. Some articles have said 2017. So if it was taken the same year, one would imagine it could only have been taken in January or early February. So that's kind of quite an important question as well, as to ask, to get clarity on that, exactly when was that photo taken. Anyway, Karen Carter says, who cares? Everybody has tensions. Doesn't make everybody go out and kill people. Again, you can't say, I got married early and I didn't kill anyone, or I'm an introvert and I didn't kill anyone, or I have tensions and I didn't do anything. I could say the same thing. This is about trying to understand someone else's criminal psychology. It's not trying to understand your psychology. It's trying to understand someone else's. Also, it's not tension by itself. It's tension along with, well, I got married early and this and that and that and that and that. And you'll see when you build up a sufficient profile, it actually starts to feel like, well, this is becoming inevitable. This is drawing forward only in one direction. This is absolutely inevitable where it's going, right? That's what it feels like when you're on the right track, and certainly in terms of that department. James says, but slow and long building tensions without an outlet can. Yeah, absolutely. You see it so often in true crime. Jodi Arias, Oscar Pistorius. I can mention quite a few cases, but you see slow building tensions also in the Meredith Kercher case. By the way, today is the 15-year anniversary of the murder of Meredith Kercher. I would have really liked to have covered that today. Maybe I'll cover it tomorrow. Okay. Purple says, I find this narrative fascinating yet terrifying. Yeah, if you've got these tensions building and you don't have a healthy release, then, for example, healthy releases are things like exercise, having someone to talk to, finding some way of dealing with something in a way that deals with that tension. The other thing is you may deal with those tensions in a way that aggravates it. So you've got this, I don't know, sexual frustration, or you feel impotent in your marriage, or you feel powerless or whatever, and you want this alter ego to deal with it. Well, looking at certain kind of pornography might make that 10 times worse, right? You're starting to program yourself to be an arsehole. Okay, let me continue. So I think one has a sense that Alan himself may have been happy to have a daughter compared to many men who want to have sons or even prefer to have sons. If Alan didn't prefer to have sons, why didn't he? Did he have a troubling boyhood? And at this point, it's a question. We don't know what the answer is. At this point, it's a question. So if anyone out there grew up with Richard Allen and wants to tell us anonymously or however, I bullied him, or I knew him, he was very troubled, or his family moved or whatever, it would be useful to know that. That's definitely important. Kathleen Grieve says he comes from a broken home. We need confirmation of that. So now we're going to go and look at childhood trauma. And here we're not going into what we know, we're going into what we possibly could infer, right? I want to just see what Cotton Star said over here. What did he say? I've got to go all the way up to, still can't find it. Yeah, there we go. Great point. All history matters. We leave behavioral breadcrumbs all day, every minute of every single day. What I love about that comment is there are some people that have said during this analysis, I don't think that matters. Like, I don't think him getting married early matters, or I don't think her being older matters, or I don't think if he had no experience that matters, or I don't think him getting his license quite late in his life, like at I think 46 years of age, I don't think that matters. Whereas another psychology is all of it matters, and you just got to figure out how much that mattered and how much that mattered, and also all the other things that mattered. Obviously, in a situation where Richard Allen is, because it's innocent till proven guilty, obviously in a situation where someone eventually does something, then everything mattered to get them to that particular point. Unless you, of that psychology where you say, oh, it is all random and he's just evil. That's just not realistic. Marlene Stewart, good to see you here. That's true. That's true. Kathleen says we are the sum total of all our experiences. Yes and no. You can decide that you're not. If you are washed up, or you don't like who you are, or you want to turn a new leaf or forge a new identity, you can say, stop. I'm not the sole sum total of all my experiences. I'm not trauma. I'm not brokenness. I'm not what my unloving mom said or my unloving dad said or didn't say. I'm going to interrupt that thing and say, I will forge my identity. I will break that thing that where I'm the sum total, and actually I will decide who I am. You can do that. But generally, if you don't interrogate that process, then you are. And if you've had positive experiences, great, then you're the sum total of a wonderful, positive, whatever. But if there's been a heck of a lot of negativity and you don't interrogate that, then that is going to lead you down to a certain bridge, right? Okay. one Madonkey. I don't know if that's I'm a donkey or one Madonkey, but I think it started from his childhood and he hid it well, then just snapped. Okay. Okay, so let's continue. So we're dealing now with childhood trauma. So now we're going totally out of what we know about Richard Allen, and we're going to deal with the subject matter in a broad way. What happened to that? Okay. Why is that displaying so weird? Okay, so I'm going to refer you guys to a blog post from Mary DeMuth. I don't know if I'm saying it right, DeMuth. And it's this particular thing. As I said, we're going completely out of Richard Allen and we're going to general questions. Can you read what it says there? So I've just highlighted, I didn't go through all 8. I'm just highlighting a couple based on this particular blog. And this is what I've highlighted. One innocent reason why someone might have an exaggerated interest in children is if they didn't, this is from me, this isn't from her, is that they didn't interact regularly or in a healthy way with both children and adults in their own lives as both children and adults. Right? Do you guys agree with that? Let me repeat that. One innocent reason why, shall I peep out the top there or there? One innocent reason why someone might have an exaggerated interest in children is if they didn't interact regularly or in a healthy way with both children and adults in their own lives. Do you guys agree with that? How can you not interact regularly? Well, if you were isolated or if you moved often, you could also say you interact, but not in a healthy way. But what are unhealthy interactions when you're a kid? Well, bullying. Your interactions could be violent. Someone bullies you. Your parents are quite kind of disciplinarians. It's not a tender, sensitive thing. It's a harsh thing. And so you grow up in this harsh environment, you withdraw, and you are dictated to by life. And then at some point later on, you feel like, no, I want to do some dictating, right? So there may be an interest in a kind of role playing where the perpetrator regresses or reverts to the past in order to deal with issues from the past. So what we're doing is we're talking about possibilities here. I mean, we don't know. That's why we're talking about possibilities. We're saying, Mel Stiller, good to see you. We may be talking about some kind of regression. We may be talking about psychologically is reverting to dealing with issues of the past. And the question is, what are the issues of the past? What are the issues of the past that need to be dealt with? Well, I didn't have a lot of girlfriends, or I didn't develop confidence with whatever. And I wanted to. I'm seeing movies, I'm seeing this, and I want that experience as well. So according to Mary DeMuth, one of several reasons why adults may target young children, one of them is because they're acting out of their own difficult and unresolved past. I said this previously, I said this troubling event in 2007 could be because of some other troubling event, that the troubling event in the past could be carried into the present, that was 2017. Sharon says, please take the pinned poll. Let's have a look at the pinned poll right now. Still, job is only 3%. Family dynamics only 5%. Most of you say childhood. Childhood is where it's all at. 56% say all of the above. If I may be so bold, I would say it's fairly equal across the board. Your job is part of who you are. Your childhood is part of who you are. Your family dynamics when you're a kid, but also when you're an adult, the way you make your family, that's all part of who you are. It's not just one thing, typically. Then briefly, all of that is to do, they've got issues with their own past. So that's really a question we want to keep asking. Did Richard Allen have issues with his past? Well, to me, just the alcohol, what do they call it? He was a recovering alcoholic, I think. Just that seems to show he's got issues with his past. Being institutionalized because he's drinking seems to show he's got issues with his past. Obviously, we need to know specifically what are we talking about. This is a picture of him. Let's bring it up. Do you think he's got issues with his past? So something else from this blog site, because they sometimes can't meet their emotional needs in normal relationships. That can be true of all of us. You may feel like, cheapers, I need more of this, or I need more of that, or that's too much, or whatever. And so if you can't get your emotional needs, then where do you get it? Look at Chris Watts. For whatever reason, he didn't feel like whatever. And then what did he do? Should you talk to your wife? Should you do something else? Should you talk about it? Should you think about it? What should you do? If you talk about it and it's not resolved, then what do you do after that? Okay. Because of injury, this is according to, what's her name? Mary DeMuth. Because of injury, they've learned the only way to get close to someone is through control. They falsely believe this constitutes a personal relationship. It may be that someone, this is from me, it may be that someone who feels he lacks agency needs a big age gap in order to feel powerful. This definitely appears to be the case with Richard Allen. He does seem to be someone who, for whatever reason, lacks agency. In his marriage, certainly on his wife's social media, he seems blank and withdrawn. Do you guys agree that in terms of her social media, he seems to lack agency? There's a scene where his wife kind of sneaks up on him by the vehicle and then kind of cackles, and he just sort of looks up and looks back. You kind of get the sense that he's not enjoying things, right? And that it's not a joke to him. It's not so much fun. It's not as much fun for him as it is for her. Don't you get that sense? Now, another one is because there is power in getting away with a crime like this. So if you ask the same question about Jeffrey Dahmer, why did he do it? And you say, why did Bridge Guy do this? Because there was power in the execution of it. And power can be kind of an aphrodisiac. It can make you feel like you're alive. It can be something that feels sexual can even feel exciting. It's like, wow, I feel powerful. It's a nice feeling, right? Right? You're only going to get that feeling of that giddiness of power if you don't have power. If you do have power, you don't need to get power. If you don't have power, then those rare brushes with it are going to feel like a rush, right? It's going to feel exciting, this kind of exciting rush. So think about just that idea, the power, not just in committing the crime, but in getting away with the crime. And isn't that what he did for 4 or 5 years? Imagine what that felt like. So if Alan did commit these crimes and he felt he got away with them, you can bet that that did wonders for his self-esteem. If he was ever concerned that he wasn't good enough or smart enough, outsmarting everyone had to feel pretty good while it lasted. And then it had to feel pretty terrible when that warm and fuzzy sense of being the smartest person in the room fizzled when he was found out and caught. What do you think he's thinking over here? Isn't that what this expression is saying? In the valley of the blind, the one-eyed man is king until he isn't anymore. Let's see what you guys say. Yeah, defeated. I think it's defeated. It's like the whole bubble is burst. The bubble has burst. Then this is going back to Mary DeMuth. She says, because perpetrators live and believe in hedonism, that everything and everyone exists for their pleasure, right? And that's also linked to narcissism. I would amend that and say it's linked to unhealthy narcissism, not just narcissism, right? So if you think about someone who's participating in pornography, especially excessively, that's kind of hedonistic. That's like pleasure, 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 pleasure. I want pleasure, I want pleasure, right? And in that pornography world, where everyone exists for pleasure, it's easy to think, well, what about in the real world? What if, if every time you go into pornography, there's pleasure, 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 like instant pleasure, then why can't I have that in the real world? Why can't I apply that in the real world? And that's where you actually run into a problem. And someone who's so caught up in that may lose touch with reality, where they think, wow, I want this experience, well, I'm going to have that experience. That person exists for my pleasure. Think about those words in Jeffrey Dahmer. I want sexual release, well, I'm going to get it with that person's pure hedonism. Fantasy, ecstasy, fantasy release, and then eventually, well, I'm going to use a real person's life in order to get that feeling that I want. So I think pornography and instant gratification programs a sense of hedonism. Do you guys agree with that? It programs like the sense of hedonism. I even would go as far as to say social media to some extent does as well. When a hedonism in a sense of tell me what I want to hear, right? And I also I want to know about this right now. I can't wait. I need to know about this, and the way I want to hear it right now. It's also a kind of hedonism. It's also a kind of narcissism, right? Which is to say, if you've got strong feelings, no matter how inappropriate, act on them. That's basically what hedonism is. I've got very strong feelings. Well, I'm going to act on them. I see it quite a lot in true crime. I believe really, really strongly that that's the case. Okay, so it is the case. No. That's not how it works. Facts are facts, and things are anchored in facts, and things work together. Just because I believe it so strongly doesn't make it true. But there are a lot of people who want that to be the case, right? There's a whole industry around, I believe that strongly. Okay, well, I'll tell you that then. Paul Ward says, I think he's battled with his mind and fantasies. Thanks for that. Okay, it does look like he's kind of in shock, doesn't it? So think about this thing. If you've got strong feelings, no matter how inappropriate, act on them. Jeffrey Dahmer did. Didn't Alan give in to similar, not only hedonistic impulses, but clearly sick and sadistic impulses? Overall, though, I believe something was missing from Alan's childhood, and this haunted him into adulthood, becoming a fixation, a fetish, a perversion. And now I want to talk about ordinary human sexuality. So what you might notice we're doing is we're not actually going into his life story. We're dealing with general subject matter and saying, can we apply it to him? Can we apply it to him? How much can we apply it to him? Right? And now we're going to just apply just general sexuality, right? Ordinary human sexuality. I feel like it's a little bit where angels fear to tread, because you might say, what is ordinary human sexuality? Or who are you to say what it is? And that's why I sort of defer to statistics. What is the average in terms of that? So have a look at this image. Can you see how the, let's take that away, or how can I? So when you look at that drawing, so it's kind of a sketch or a cartoon trying to show the psychology of a pedophile. What do you see there? Well, it looks like a man. It looks like an old man. It looks like a guy that's not shaved, who is kind of bald and ugly. And so it's like the cartoon is kind of making a caricature of what you'd assume is a pedophile, which is some old dude sitting at a computer getting thrills, right? Some ugly old dude sitting at a computer getting thrills. Also a guy who's neglecting himself. He doesn't shave and I don't know, doesn't cut his hair or whatever it is, right? That's just kind of it's a caricature, right? But now let's deal with ordinary human psychology. And this is, I think, is quite interesting, quite fascinating. A recent study, so let me put this in chat. Let me ask you guys before I put it in chat. When do you think women reach peak desirability? The two questions. When do you think women reach peak desirability? And when do you think men reach peak desirability? So two questions. Let's see what you think about that. This is just general. When would you say women reach peak desirability? And when do you think men reach peak desirability? And you can say for me or whatever. Stephanie says, can you take down the comment so we can see the words? Okay. Terry says 1830. You got one of those right. Women 34, men 18. Okay, it's quite interesting to see the variation here. Betty says women 25, men 27. Okay. So Koi Cat says boys, teens, girls 35. That's interesting. Nature Lover says women peak at 20, men at 40. That's quite interesting. What are you talking about? A sexual peak or a attractiveness peak? Let me say the question again. When do you think women reach their desirability peak? So, and this is in a heterosexual thing, obviously, although I suppose you could also say women finding women attractive. When do you think women reach their desirability peak, and when do you think men reach their desirability peak? Peak desirability, right? Not peak sexuality, peak desirability. Mark Reed says 25 and 30. Okay. So you can see it's quite subjective. Okay. Van Lechimp, good to have you here. Okay, so this is what a dating platform showed the answer to be. Stephanie says 25 women, men 40. Okay, so look at this. Women peak desirability 18. I think a lot of you will agree that's younger than you thought. Men peak desirability 50. That's definitely older than I would have imagined. But I'm kind of rubbing my hands at that because it's like, well, I'm 50. I'm at peak desirability. Woohoo! I'm not sure I believe that, but there you go. Nature Lover says, I think a man comes together in all ways by 40. Nature Lover says, I was close. Okay. But can you see, okay, this is not like gospel. It may not be true for you. It's true from this dating platform. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is the gap, the natural gap, which all of you have kind of acknowledged. Some of you make that gap a lot narrower, that according to this platform, women are at a peak desirability gap of 18 years old, right? And then it's what, 32 years difference going to the peak desirability gap of men, right? And if you look at that thing on its own terms and you say, well, does that mean 50-year-olds should go out with 18-year-olds? It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. But it nevertheless shows that the peak desirability of women is, according to that, quite young, certainly younger than I thought it would be. And peak desirability of men, 50, older than I thought it would be. So can you see that is, according to that platform statistics, natural desirability, right? And then you look at the Delphi case and you say, wasn't he acting out, and so actually kind of almost an abominable question, wasn't he acting out a kind of natural thing? And the answer is no, it's not natural, it's not normal, but there is some substance to the desirability of younger women, and the, not that it applies in his case, but the desirability from women's perspective to older men. Mally says, I would have said, Angela says, I think women like men that are established and men like a more sexual aspect. That's quite a good summary. So, I mean, I'm obviously not saying this is like carved in stone. I'm just saying it's quite interesting to think about it in that context. Now, how do we apply this to the Delphi case? How do we apply it to the Delphi case? I think I must do it like that. Anyway, what this suggests broadly is that younger women are more desirable than older women, right? And you might not like that. You might say, well, older men are more desirable than younger men. But you might say, no, I don't actually think so. I think younger men are more desirable than older men. But broadly speaking, what these stats show is the following. Younger women are more desirable than older women. And in terms of the Delphi case, didn't didn't the person that committed this crime think, I want a very, very young woman. I don't want a younger woman. I want the youngest, almost like the bottom, the youngest possible woman, right? Do you follow what I'm trying to say? In other words, almost like saying, I want the jackpot. I want the best possible, I want the fantasy, right? In terms of his fantasy. In other words, it's following kind of natural human desire, but to a point where it kind of goes off the rails and becomes unnatural. And ironically, the bridge used to be a railway track. So it literally is something going off the track, right? Okay. Are you guys finding this discussion worthwhile, or are you finding it's making you uncomfortable? Nature Lover says, I think it was a non-sexual crime. Okay. So let's do a quick poll. How many of you think it was a non-sexual crime? If you think it was non-sexual, put a 1. If you think it was a sexual crime, put a 2. So it was a 46-year-old man, 45-year-old man, and a 13 and 14-year-old, a 13 and a 14-year-old girl. One who looked quite a lot like his daughter. How many of you think it was if you don't think it was sexual, put a 1. If you think it was, put a 2. Let's see what you say. Teresa's good point. The omission of details is why I think it's SA. It could also be because of the age. That could also be a factor, and or both. So there's mostly 2s. There's a 1 and there's also a 1 there. Yeah. So most people here think that it is. There's a sexual element. I think that there is as well. I think that there is as well. Yeah, exactly. Did you guys know that he took a souvenir as well? Any guesses as to what that souvenir is or was? Okay, now according to Fatherly, power, money, and biology may play a role in the initial attraction to older men, but that illusion doesn't last, right? I think what that means is that you can almost read that 2 ways. Someone who's attracted to older men because of power, money, and biology. But isn't that also in the other direction, that older men may be interested in power, money, and biology? Power, money, and biology may play a role in initial attraction to older men, but that illusion doesn't last. Okay, now we're going to deal with addiction. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We don't really know. Oh, underwear. Okay. Funny, I didn't even think of that. That's definitely a possibility. I didn't actually think of that. I was actually watching All Quiet on the Western Front about German soldiers, and it just happened where I stopped watching in order to do this live. These poor soldiers on the Western Front, it's on Netflix, were smelling underwear or something. They were like in a barracks and they were smelling. You guys are probably thinking, what have you been watching? But it's on Netflix. I think it's All Quiet on the Western Front. And these soldiers, the one guy came back from somewhere and he was smelling, or he was holding up underwear, and then everyone wanted to smell it. So yeah, so it is quite interesting. I think it could also be jewelry. And so the question is, did they find jewelry and underwear when they did a search? Jewelry would certainly be something that wouldn't easily burn and would, could possibly be dug up. Terry says, I believe it was reported that a blue jacket was missing from one of the girls. That's interesting. Carl says that's gross. Well, I'm just saying what I saw. Someone says earrings. Okay. Okay. Okay, so no, sniff, not snuff. Okay, so in terms of addiction, so just think, and this is a very quick way of looking at it. We know that Alan had trouble with alcoholism. That's addiction to alcohol. Well, didn't he have trouble with addictions to anything else? So it's just that question. Was Bridge Guy addicted to what was he addicted to? One thing that I've come across in true crime is that addiction seems to play a role in many, many cases. You either caught up in a fairy tale that can be an addiction in itself, you sort of caught up in it, or they are literally addicted. I mean, even Chris Watts said, I'm addicted to you, to Nicole Kessinger. There is addicted to her. He actually used those words. That can make you crazy. That can make you not think rationally, right? Think about Jeffrey Dahmer. I think he used those words as well, that he was addicted to his fantasies. Well, isn't that exactly what happened with Bridge Guy? Wasn't he as well? So we know that there was addiction with Richard Allen, with alcoholism. Well, wasn't he addicted to anything else? And that's a really good point. Anyone who's addicted to something has got a problem with self-discipline. They are caught up in hedonism. They're caught up in instant gratification. They're caught up in, I can use you or that as a source of pleasure, of instant pleasure, right? I can't stop myself. Okay. Now we're going to revisit orientation. I'm almost at the end of this. Just bring this up. Now we're going to revisit orientation. I want to thank Stephanie for providing this map because it really does clarify everything. So this map. So can you see, let me take myself away. Can you see how much of that bridge is not over the actual river? So again, that's the north side of the bridge leading up to the trail, right? That is Libby's side of the bridge. Abby and Richard Allen live on this side, but can you see most of the bridge is not over water over here? Does that make sense? I think, yeah, you can quite clearly see. So in order to differentiate north from south and this side of the bridge from that side, the side where the river is the north side, is the coming from the trailhead side. The side that is ensconced in jungle and in trees and private property is the south side, the Richard Allen side, the Delphi side of the bridge. That I think should make it very clear if it hasn't been clarified enough. What does someone say? Laughing my ass off is an author. Okay. So Alan was so now we want to deal with another aspect that we all know. The question is, how important is it? And again, like Cotton Star said, everything's important. So think about this. Alan was a keen hiker. Just that on its own. Alan was a keen hiker. What does that mean? Oh, is it? Okay. Titanic discussions. Greetings. Wanted to apologize for typos. That's fine. Don't worry. Oh, okay, cool. Thanks for that, Titanic discussions. Don't worry about the typos. I've made quite a few errors in my research as well, so don't worry about that. As long as we keep learning and developing. I'm going to be talking in a moment about, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, you don't really know anything about the case, I'm going to be talking about that. Okay, so Alan was a keen hiker, and sometimes that outdoorsiness plays into the fabric of the case, right? Must I say that again? Alan was a keen hiker. Sometimes that outdoorsiness plays into the fabric of the case. In the John Benet Ramsey case, just a very simple thing that I looked at was, I said, how important is scout, like literally being a scout, in the John Benet Ramsey story? Just a very simple question. How important is the idea of someone being a scout in that? And it really opens up a lot, really does open up a lot. So in this case, the fact that someone's a hiker, how does that play into the story? Does it play into it a little or a lot? And as I say, think about cases where it does play into that. Think about the circumstances of Suzanne Morphew's disappearance. Was there someone in that story who was particularly outdoorsy? How about Brian Laundrie? Was the outdoorsy aspect of his identity part of the criminal psychology? Well, think about that case, and then also where Brian Laundrie ended up, and think about outdoors. What about Patrick Frazee, who was a farmer? Was there anything farmyardy about his crime? You're only going to know the answer to that if you've read my book or studied that case, or both. Did I miss a comment or a super chat? Thanks a lot, Renee. Thanks for that. Okay, so now we coming to the end of this. A souvenir was taken from the crime scene. Some of you have said it could be underwear. Some of you have said earrings. We don't know what it is. We don't actually know what that souvenir was. But we know that something was taken. Can you guys see that? Oh, you can't. Is it that? No, it's not. Is it that? There it is. Okay. The killer's staged bodies, he may have taken a souvenir. Where is that? There it is. So do you guys know this? Because of the nature of the victim's wounds, it is nearly certain the perpetrator would have gotten blood on his clothing. Large amount of blood was lost by the victims. That also shows that this is a particularly violent crime. It wasn't just sexual, that there was also a violent side to it, which I think, if you think about the violence, that there's a lot of blood, doesn't that speak about a huge amount of frustration, a huge amount of powerlessness? Like if you think about Jeffrey Dahmer, the destruction of the bodies in his story, the amount of destruction of people's bodies is how much he needs power, right? Doesn't the same apply here? The amount of blood speaks to, I think, a certain amount of pain. In other words, it's a kind of blood that is being shed to, in a way, deal with emotional pain, maybe even physical pain. Thanks a lot, Renee. Thanks a lot for that. Ginger Snap says violence because of possible impotence. I don't think it could be impotence, but I think it's more kind of existential impotence, a kind of sense of I don't exert power of my life, right? That kind of thing. That's how I see it. I mean, it's obviously I think there is rage. Why is there rage? Because there's frustration. Why is there frustration? When you see him in the vehicle and his wife kind of comes up to him, imagine that times 1,000. What's going on there, right? What's going on there? Let's see if I can actually bring up that video. Let's quickly play it. I don't really want to go past 2 hours. Let's see if I can quickly play that video. Okay, here we go. So another thing that I find quite interesting in that little video is that he's not behind the steering wheel. Now, why is that? Is it because it's not his vehicle, or because he's not allowed to drive, or does she drive, or what's going on there? And isn't that in a way, and this is taking a bit of license because it's just a little clip, but isn't that possibly speaking in a larger way about their relationship? Is that in terms of their marriage, she's driving the vehicle. In terms of their household, she's behind the wheel. How does he feel about that? How does he feel about her mocking him? Now, you might say, I mock my husband all the time. It's cool. But someone who's already dealing with tension and dealing with feeling crap about whatever, feeling impotent in a sense of not having much power over their life, may not like that thing. And maybe it even harkens back to high school, right? Yeah. And so if he's feeling submissive, maybe he wants to dominate someone. Maybe he wants someone to be submissive. Raoul Thomas says he looks angry or constipated. Okay, one or the other, right? Someone says that's taking a lot of license. Okay. Okay. So I don't know, what do you think is the souvenir that was taken? So if the souvenir is about power, what do you think that souvenir is? What do you think that souvenir is? Is it an item of clothing? Is it jewelry? I think something that's quite small that can be a very idiosyncratic souvenir, because I mean, clothing can be just clothing, but jewelry is quite idiosyncratic and it's sort of sparkly, right? Maybe I'm just trying to think, what didn't Jeffrey Dahmer keep any souvenirs? Let me just see if we can find that. Besides skulls. Just trying to see what I can find here. I'll have a look in chat in a moment. Ted Bundy kept heads as souvenirs. Jeffrey Dahmer, he kept genitals. Oof, okay. I'm just trying to see if he kept anything else besides kind of the obvious. Okay. Anyway, it's going into a pretty grisly area. Okay, so that's kind of my spiel, but there's one more thing I want to address, and that is just folks who, there's some folks who have kind of said, I was really disappointed in what you covered. Like I was really disappointed. And all I can say is basically read that. Basically, there's always a learning curve to true crime. If you're frustrated with my coverage of the Delphi case, maybe you know so much more. Well, then you should go to other channels that share your knowledge base. If you feel like, yeah, but I knew about the map a long time ago, or we've talked about the profile ages ago, or I can't believe that you didn't know it was his brother-in-law. I don't think this channel has done too badly prepping from almost zero knowledge to where we are in 3 to 4 days. I do think that we've gotten um, like I'm quite surprised that dealing with this case that there's not this. Someone said, "Oh yeah, no, so it's obvious which side of the bridge." Well, when you research, you don't kind of find like obvious stories, or I certainly haven't, where it's like here's a map showing that's the side that they came on or anything like that. I haven't found that, right? And I think I probably need to put that narrative in place so that someone else coming into this case can find it. I'm really surprised the media haven't done it, and I'm really surprised law enforcement haven't made it explicit. Like whenever we talk about this case, I mean, it's of primary importance. This is the route they came in. What does that tell us about the perpetrator, right? In other words, let's show the woods, not the trees. Let's show the woods. And so I will probably on my Crime Rocket 2 website put up a map that explicitly shows this is where they came in and this is how the bridge works, because you should have known that a long time ago. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in the woods. You need to figure out the map very early on. It's taken me 2 or 3 days, but as I said, I'm shocked that it's like not old news. It should be old news. It might be old news to you. Thanks a lot for that, Paddy. But if you feel frustrated that it's such old news, you should go where it suits your learning curve, right? I'm still learning, and a lot of people here are also learning as well. There is a learning curve, bear that in mind, and a learning curve takes time. But some learning curves may be behind others, and mine may be behind yours. So if mine is behind yours, continue surfing the learning curve you are on, or the one that you're comfortable with. Does that make sense? And that is it from my side. What's this? This is kind of where we are right now. 16,000 tips later. 16,000 tips later. So I'm gonna sort of end off by playing another clip of Doug Carter, and let's just see what he says. Let me just kind of bring it up. See if I can find it here. I think it's this one. I hope I'm in the right place.
I'm yet again asking you for your patience and please your understanding while our system of due process works.
Did you catch that? He's talking about due process. And this is due process for law enforcement. It is the legally necessary and required protocols that they've got to go through in order to prosecute a case, due process. That's something that's lacking on YouTube and in true crime. There's no due process. I think that person's suspicious. In the Delphi case, you could have gone through dozens or hundreds of people. I think it could be him. I think it could be that one. there needs to be also due process in true crime, where you follow certain proper protocols, where you follow the evidence. You don't just, I think it could be that, right? Anyway, so this is what he says.
Also remember that all persons arrested are presumed innocent. All persons arrested are presumed innocent. You all will have an innate desire to subjectively interpret and then report what you think. We in the law enforcement realm cannot, and you should never allow us to, talk about what we think concerning facts, but rather discuss and share at the right time what it is we know.
You pick that up. We're not going to talk about what we think. We'll only talk about what we know at the right time. And when is that? When they're prosecuting, when they're in court, they'll talk about what they know. Evidence.
The time will come when additional details can be released. But again, today is not that day. It's about Abby and Libby, their families, and this community, this nation, and even our planet. The prosecutor has been very clear with law enforcement about what his expectations are, about what can and cannot be released, shared, or discussed. So we will, of course, comply. If you choose to be critical of our silence.
So while I was preparing for this live, I'd previously come across in this press conference where he says something like, we are investigating someone else. We think that there could be someone else, or there could be someone else. I wanted to play that clip, but I just couldn't find the exact point in it. So, but the point is, it's important to bear that in mind, is that they acknowledge that there could be, it feels like besides Keegan Klein and besides Richard Allen, there could be somebody else. Stephanie will like that, because I think Stephanie thinks that there definitely is somebody else. But it definitely adds another dimension to what are we actually dealing with here. So they mentioned that in a very confined, restricted news conference, press conference. But you feel like the reason they've said that suggests that there's something to that. I do think you could just have a shared social media account, which could mean that someone else should have known what was going on, in terms of, if it's a shared social media account, everyone who has access to that account should know that someone wanted to meet someone somewhere and somebody did. Why didn't you come forward? It might just be that. I think some people think that there was more than one man at the crime scene. I'm not one of them, but I do think you could have a shared social media thing, which might make you an accessory after the fact. That's how I interpret that. But anyway, that's certainly an aspect that adds intrigue to all of this. Okay, so that is it from me. Let's go through some of your comments. Kami says, when they mentioned that the killer may be in this room. Nature Lover says they're still asking for more tips. I also find that interesting. I find that quite concerning. At a press conference to say we're arresting this guy, to say, well, we're still asking for tips. Thanks a lot, Terry. I appreciate it. VI Fly says, hi, new subscriber. Did they ever say what the cause of death was? No. Just that there was a lot of blood. So blood could have been shed by a gunshot, or by stabbing, or even by SA, as horrible as that is to contemplate. Jane says, I had a meltdown listening to this. I have a phobia listening to constant sniffing. Oh, you mean not me? I hope. I first read that like, jeepers, was it that bad? Okay. They want more tips here. Julie says, and the know-all theories going back years were clearly wrong anyway. Paul Ward says, I've seen blurred pictures of the murder in progress on as above, so below channel. Okay. Maybe they want to encourage other potential victims to come forward. Okay, anyway, so that is it from my side. It could be stabbing. We don't have any idea what it is. They said there was a weapon and lots of blood. Yeah. You must bear in mind, because it's an outdoor setting, you wouldn't really want screaming. So something like stabbing someone would create lots of screaming. And even if you a long distance away, someone would probably hear that. So I don't know if I think that's the case. That's just my personal opinion. So the last thing I want to say is, can you see how you can develop a profile? So it's up to you guys to say, how well did you do, True Crime Rocket Science, how well did you do in profiling Richard Allen? Like, how well did you put together a profile? And you might say, not well at all. And then I might say, well, I don't really have much to work with, but how did I do given how little we've got to work with? And we looked at all the things that we know, that he's a hiker, that he married at a certain age, what his job was. And so where it appears that you've got virtually nothing to develop a profile, you can also look at that exact information and say, we've actually got more than enough. We've actually got a huge amount. But the one area where there's kind of a big hole is his childhood, is his parents. We don't know anything about that. I believe that that is important. I also think another area that we don't know enough about, I mean, we don't know enough about any of it, but another area that we definitely don't know enough about is his marriage. What was his marriage like in more detail? We've had a few glimpses, but what was it really like? What did it feel like for him? But the point is, you can have quite a small amount of information. You can extrapolate so much. And yeah, I hope you found that extrapolation valuable and interesting. I really hope so. Okay, let's go through some final comments. Bria says, did he ever play baseball? Any word from his wife? Well, I think his wife is trying to keep a low profile. Mel Stiller, thanks very much. Marcel says, where's your tip jar today? Not quite sure what that means. Yeah, gunshots would be easily heard. One possibility is that they were strangled, which is soundless, and there was SA, and the SA actually led to that. That's one possibility. Karen Franks, good to chat, so upset for families. Yeah. Sagedi Norna says, I cringe to think what else they found on his computer. Ms. Baumer 13 says, I love all your content, excellent live. Thanks a lot. So this is something we can build on. As we get more information, we can develop our profile. We can say, oh, so his job was more important than we thought, or that his marriage was more important than we thought, or that his childhood was more important than we thought, or that all of it was important. You know, Julie says, I really want to know about his marriage. Yeah. Okay, so that is it. I think we had 2 hours 10. I think that's a good place to end off. We just want to wish Stephanie well. Her son's got kind of the flu. We just hope that he gets better soon. So thanks for being with us, Stephanie. Yeah, thanks, Terry, as well for being here. I'm looking forward to having some guests on again. So I have invited Terry and Stephanie and Lisa, but it seems to always be not terribly good timing. But hopefully we'll get ourselves sorted out in that respect. To Helen Back says, thanks for another thought-provoking live. As long as your thoughts are provoked, I'm happy. Deep Diver says, you start the case by looking up any violations, but there aren't any. There aren't any. As far as we know, he didn't break other laws, as far as we know. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Mods, members, new subscribers, welcome. I often announce lives on Twitter, so head to @CrimeRocket on Twitter. As I said, I do want to make it easy for people to navigate this case. I want to put up a map on Crime Rocket 2, and just so people can see, oh, that's where they came in. That should be really out there. Everyone should be aware of that. Yeah, someone says 2 speeding fines and not wearing a seatbelt. That's not really, I think that's things we are all guilty of in a way. Thanks a lot, Nature Lover. Thanks, guys. Take care. It's time to put Timmy to bed. Take care. I've put I haven't put anything up on Timmy lately. I took a little clip of a lizard, but that's not really relevant. So it's my bedtime as well. So I'm a little fuzzy. I've got 1 day left of antibiotics. So I'm glad I'm going to be through that. Thanks a lot, Sagedi Norna. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. Take care. See you next time.